According to a Forbes article from 2024, 40% of Americans have adopted a side hustle. What's the deal? My name is Mike. This is my lovely wife, Danielle. Welcome to our What's the Deal podcast. Danielle, could you tell us a little bit more about like what we doing? What's the deal with this podcast? This is the first one, so maybe we should hop into that real quick before we get to the main topic.
Yeah, we just wanted to dive into several different types of topics and do some of our own research. We're entering our 30s era. We're just regular folks with 9-to-5 jobs, and we just have lots of questions and we have lots of things that we discuss. And we just wanted to share what we find with all of you and create a safe, open discussion space.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy out there, in the world, and we're just trying to figure out, hey, what's the deal? Let's talk about it.
Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. And so without further ado, let's get back to the subject at hand, that being side hustles. And kind of an interesting way to start, right? Like it's a little bit meta, I guess, to get things started here because, we're doing a podcast, right?
That's
and
a
like
side
as
hustle.
we just said, yeah, exactly. It's like we have regular jobs. So I guess one could say this is a type of side hustle. And so I guess maybe first things first, I'm assuming most people out there probably know what a side hustle is. But like, should we probably just kind of define what it is?
Yeah, let's define it. What is a side hustle?
So I guess to me, a side hustle is, something that kind of supplements maybe your career, maybe supplements, your 9-to-5, or maybe your primary source of income. So I think some really easy examples of those would be food delivery service, right? These DoorDashes, is Postmates still a thing? Uber Eats, I feel like.
Uber Eats, Grubhub.
Yeah, they kind of took over, didn't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Grubhub. Anyways, ride-sharing apps, Uber, Lyft, things like that, dog walking, pet sitting, freelancing, podcasting, online coaching, like the list goes on, right? Like it's all those things where, and it's kind of interesting too, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more as well, but a lot of these side hustles can be full-time incomes. But, probably just take a little bit more time to build that up. But at least in my mind, that's what a side hustle is. So I guess the main question then becomes, why? Mm-hmm. Right? What was that number? I said 40% from this Forbes article. 40% of Americans have adopted a side hustle, which seems kind of high, honestly, if I'm being honest. But I don't know. Do you think that could be real?
I think it's probably realistic. Yeah. A lot of the people that I know have some sort of side hustle. A lot of my friends do something on the side, like makeup artistry or working in a restaurant, working at a cafe, just pet sitting, things like that. And it is really just to supplement their regular income because a lot of people have debt, from college or from buying a car or other types of debt that they're trying to pay off. And when you have debt, it's really hard to get ahead because you're just paying bills. And so it feels like you're trying to pay down your debt, you're trying to pay your bills, even just regular living expenses like paying rent or a mortgage or whatever the situation is that you're in. And then you need that extra cash to basically just allow you to pay down that debt or pay those bills a little bit quicker and maybe have some extra money for all the other fun things you want to do, going on vacation, going shopping, buying your coffee every day, or going out to dinner with friends. Yeah. So it's expensive to live. And especially right now, I'm sure a lot of people are feeling it. Groceries are super expensive. Yeah. Rent is super high if you don't own a home. Like rent is crazy out of control at the moment. And then on top of that, buying a house just seems so unrealistic for a lot of people with just a regular job that pays you, mostly between, I don't know, $75 and $100 something dollars a year.
National average, that's actually high for national averages. But yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. And actually, so I was just looking at that same article that I was referencing. Right. The natural question is like, oh, why or whatever. It says 48% of those with the side hustle claim that it's to make ends meet.
Wow.
Which is kind of crazy too. But it goes back to exactly what you were saying, right? Like combination of whether it's debt or it's cost of living and salaries not keeping up. And again, we're not financial experts by any means, but it's pretty clear and like there's pretty well known, I would say, that cost of living is accelerating, much faster than salaries and wages are. So, our generation and the generations to come, I think, just have to adapt to that, or move or whatever, right? Which is a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of the reality of where we're at. And so I think that's exactly right. I think the biggest driver of the side hustles are people need more money. Just can't do it, right? Like you can't just like work at a hardware store,
Right.
and afford to live, buy your own home in a lot of these cities, like the densely populated cities at least. And so that's just, I feel like that's where it's at. It's almost not even, and I'm sure, sorry, I'm kind of going in a couple different directions here, but it's like, don't get me wrong, like they can be a ton of fun too. Like honestly, we're having fun with this whole thing. And that's part of the reason we started it. But right, if 48% of people are doing it to make ends meet, that's like says something else.
Right.
Too, which just kind of complicates the whole landscape there. But nonetheless, it's just an interesting phenomenon that I feel like we're running into.
Yeah. And I feel like it's especially hard when talking to older people, not necessarily old people or seniors, but folks who have already been around the block, who have already worked and own a home and kind of have their lives more or less together and figured out. They tend to say, well, I could work my job 40 hours a week, maybe a little bit more, do some overtime. And a lot of the time that was on one income for the older generations. Mm-hmm. And they could afford to buy a home. They had a car. They had a TV. They had some of these luxuries that were available to them at the time and could still live a pretty comfortable life. But they also, a lot of them will say, but we still made sacrifices. We didn't have the nicest clothes. We didn't get new shoes all the time, things like that. Mm-hmm. And I totally hear what they're saying. And I agree. I think a lot of people nowadays kind of feel like they need to keep up with the Joneses in a way. Mm-hmm. And it's so much easier to see advertisements for new clothes, buy new cars, phones are really expensive. An iPhone is like $1,000, things are just pricey.
Yep.
So, but you need those things. Like you kind of need a phone. Mm-hmm. You kind of need a car. Cars are expensive. Phones are expensive. Like clothes are expensive. You need nice clothes to go to your professional job. Mm-hmm. Things like that, so I think the idea of like making sacrifices is relevant. And I think a lot of people nowadays do that, but it's not enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that leads to the side hustle culture as well, where even if I make sacrifices, I'm not going to save up over $100,000 for a down payment on a home.
Yeah.
And also a lot of homes are in the millions now, like in some areas, especially the high cost areas, like we were just talking about along the coasts, the big cities. Some of these houses are going for $800,000, $900,000, $1 million.
Yep.
And what's a typical 20% down payment on that?
Right. $200,000 probably.
Right. Like $200,000. Right. And if you're going to pay that, plus the interest rates are super high as well in a lot of places.
Right.
It's like,
well, it's interesting. I actually looked that up because I was doing a little bit of research on how do we calculate cost of living now versus whenever, and historically, like the interest rates right now are high relative to the last 20 years, but I feel like, same thing like you kind of said, like an older generation would say like, oh, interest rates aren't high. Back when I was your age, they were 15%. And it's like, holy crap. Yeah, that is way worse. But, that's just when all the math starts to come in and you're like, I think about the math and it's like, okay, well, if a house is only $100,000 and it's 15% interest on that, 15% on that nominal number being smaller, that's just a lot less interest that you're going to have to pay versus 7% on $1 million home. You know what I mean? Like that's the part that gets you when you really start getting in the nitty gritty of the math. You said a couple of big things in there, and I was trying to like make these mental notes in my head. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point. I'm gonna, I want to connect back to that. Like, oh, that's a good one too. I might reference. Let's see. I was jotting down some notes. Yeah, I thought one of the really interesting things you said was there's almost like a hopelessness, I feel like, amongst younger generations too, right? Which then contributes to maybe more spending. And I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but I guess the thought process being, hey, these bigger expenses that I have, like buying a home, trying to buy a nice car, whatever it is, or even just, paying off student debt. Like that's another big one that like our generation deals with, and a lot of generations have too. But it's like at this day and age, so many people feel like they have to go to college and you have to buy a house, and it's like technically those things are optional. But then it's like, oh, are they though? Like, can you get a good job? And that's, again, a whole nother conversation. But when these things are, you said you're buried under debt, or if you want to buy a house, then you're just going to bury yourself under that debt too, right? Then it's like, oh my God, I'm never going to get out of this. So what's the difference if I go, splurge and buy myself a new sweater, and then I go out to go get coffee, and then I go get, go out to a nice dinner with my friends. And it's like all those things obviously are good things, and you should do those things, but you're probably just not as strict as you could be. But it's because there's that like, oh, well, I'm never going to be able to save what I need to. So let's enjoy the spending right now.
Right. Well, and because that spending, if you really add it all up, it's like, okay, $50 for a nice dinner, maybe $40-$50 for a nice sweater, if that's what you want. And then however much for your weekly coffee, maybe like, I don't know, $30-$40, something like that, $10 a day or so. And when you add all that up, it's like, well, that barely hits over $100. So if you're only spending like over $100 per week, like that's just not that much in savings per month. Yeah. That would only be like right between $400, maybe $600 a month in savings. And it's like, yes, that's a pretty good chunk of money, but over time, is that really going to contribute as much as you need to those big purchases? Yeah,
exactly. Like, again, like the example we said, like if you're trying to buy a home that's $100,000, then making those smaller decisions, not going out to dinner as frequently, not going out, like you're going to see the progress there a little bit more so than like trying to reach that $200,000 mark. Right. Which again, so like, again, sorry, taking a step back rather than just looking at the financial part of this is that like, so that's why people are going into side hustles. Or at least I think that's one major part of it, right? It's the whole finance part. But I think maybe a whole other, let's try to like flip it a little bit, because I think there's more to it. Finance might be the biggest one, but I think another big one is that there's definitely this push. I don't even know what I would say over the last maybe 10 years or something like that. Maybe with the rise of social media, right? Like everybody's becoming aware of lives they could have, jobs they could do. I feel like the level of being content with a regular job, quote unquote, right? It's just like, I feel like the younger generations are just like they're just not down. You know what I mean? And I get it. We're kind of there too, right? Like, we've done a lot of work, obviously, to get to good jobs now. Like, we're both happy in our careers, and I'm sure we can talk about that more in a different episode. But yeah, there's like yet another pressure, I feel like, right? Like where in the past it might have been perfectly acceptable, like, oh yeah, maybe I'll just do the same one, right? Like, oh yeah, I manage a hardware store, which is a perfectly acceptable job. You know what I mean? But that was also like, think about like, okay, that's what you do. You work there. You can afford your home. You can support your family, the whole thing. And you don't even know what other options necessarily are out there. But now imagine like these kids figuring out, oh, what do I want to do with my life? Do I want to manage a hardware store? And then you look on social media and you're like, oh, these same people, my age or whatever, are just filming themselves doing cool crap, and then they get to travel the world. They're making a buttload of money and the whole thing. Like, so I'm sure just like a big part of that, like there's like less satisfaction in traditional jobs nowadays. And so people are striving to want to do these exceptional jobs, or these jobs that don't even feel like jobs. And I guess we're all striving for that. But I just, at least from our experience, my experience, and I've had some of the same thoughts myself. Like, why wouldn't you? If we live in a world nowadays where you could have a crazy job like that, like what, I can make a lot of money just like traveling around and posting videos or whatever. Like, that's just a whole nother element that I see as why people are pursuing these side hustles, right? Pursue the side hustle, replace the 9 to 5. if you can build that thing up big enough. So I feel like there's probably a couple different camps of those within the, people working side hustles. What is your kind of end game? And I feel like there's a lot of kind of diversity of thought in there too.
Yeah. And I think that also that made me think about, what do people value and what are people looking for out of life and what are people looking for in a job? You mentioned younger people are not quite as satisfied with the typical desk or office job, corporate America.
Mm-hmm. Pizza parties.
Right? Pizza parties to congratulate you on your great work.
Hey, don't hate on the pizza party, but
not a raise.
Take a raise. Yeah.
Not a raise or more time off, but
aren't you satisfied?
So
it's really
satisfied.
Good pizza.
If it's the best pizza joint in town, I would still be.
How about gold crusted pizza?
Yeah, right.
Boom.
I mean,
sign me up. Anyway,
I'd be happy with
sorry,
that.
Back to what you were saying.
But so people aren't as satisfied with that. That's not really what fulfills them. That's not what makes them happy. And I think there's this kind of philosophy that has been coming about of late. And actually, it's something that we were kind of told growing up and kind of pushed in this direction is to follow your dream, do what you love, find a job that doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Do something that makes you happy.
Right.
And I think the people who are younger than us too are kind of fed that same idea. Do something that doesn't feel like work. Do something that will make you happy. And the main goal there, and something that I think I kind of identify and can see, is happiness. Mm-hmm. What makes you happy?
Yep.
And for a lot of people, it's not sitting at a desk and let's be honest, it's not a 9 to 5. It's more like an 8 to 5.
Yeah. With flexibility in there to go exercise or to go, do whatever. Like, I don't want to have to stress about, I can only schedule a dentist appointment at 2 p.m.
Right.
But I can never do it because I'm stuck at my desk.
So. Exactly. Stuff like that. There's just, those types of jobs are just, I feel, unacceptable for a lot of people because it's just unrealistic.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this too is, well, I'll kind of go into it a little bit, but if you have children, like we don't have children, but if you have a child, you need to take them to the doctor too. They have sports after school, maybe.
Yeah, like elementary schools get out at like 2 p.m.
Right.
Like I didn't even think about that until now.
Exactly. Right, so it's like, back in the day, way back in the day, when people could survive on a single income, who was the one who was able to attend to all of those things? The person staying at home, whether it was mom or dad or whatever the situation was for each family. Grandparents, maybe, aunts, uncles, whatever. Just the caring people who will do these things for the home and for the child and to take care of their life. Basically, but nowadays a lot of people have 2 incomes.
Yep.
I don't know a statistic on that. That would be interesting to find, but a lot of people must have dual income. If you're a married couple, you cannot only have one just to survive. And so I think that kind of goes back to the side hustle thing too.
Yeah.
And this is something I've thought about a lot, is that we are now moving into a time where side hustles are becoming more and more necessary to meet basic needs. I mean, you even mentioned earlier that a lot of people have a side hustle just to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. And that is a little bit mind-boggling to me.
Right. You essentially need like 3 jobs to afford something kind of situation between 2 people.
Right. It was like 40-something% of people need a side hustle in order to make ends meet.
Or at least that's what they claimed.
Right.
Which again, you could go a whole different tangent on that too. Like, they're living within their means? Like, maybe not.
Right.
But at least they think that they need that to make ends meet. Maybe they do.
And maybe it's just the lifestyle that they're choosing too. And again, it goes back to this idea of happiness. Yeah. What makes you happy?
Right.
And some people find happiness in
shopping,
bougie things, expensive things.
Yeah.
Lots eating out.
I mean, you get a rush from it.
Mm-hmm. Going on vacations. Having some extra money to save and invest and do all of those things too.
For sure.
And so what kind of makes me think is that side hustles feel like they're becoming more and more necessary. And it makes me wonder if one day you won't be able to have just one job. You'll have to have two. Are you going to have to have...
It's flipping the entire kind of what we would think of a traditional work. Like, what is work? And it's like, at one point in time, it equaled a 9 to 5. Mm-hmm. But maybe as the generations progress, right? Like, there's so many people who could just have 3 side hustles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Well, work for yourself or whatever.
And if you have the bandwidth, I'm not saying don't do it.
Yeah,
I'm saying go for it.
Right. If anything, it's just another option. And again, that going back to what we want this podcast to be, right? Like, I want to just consider a world, where it's like things are progressing, right? Like, we're changing. Things are changing. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. But it's just interesting just to like take a step back, look around you, look what's going on, and maybe think like, hey, why am I so stuck on this particular idea of doing things this way? And why are things this way? Why are things hard to afford and all that? And I don't know. It's very fascinating to me.
Yeah, me too. And I'm sure there's a lot of bigger things happening. I mean, in the world and in our country alone that affect this.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, right off the bat, I can tell you that a lot of people have college degrees now, and the market, quote, quote, the employee market is saturated.
Yeah.
Especially younger people.
Too, for sure.
They all have college degrees, where once upon a time, a college degree would equal a great job, guaranteed.
Right, because you're in the vast minority. And I think, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but like, technically you still are in the minority to have the degree, but there are a lot more people with degrees nowadays, yes. Definitely.
Right, exactly. And it's just interesting that a lot of people now with degrees are kind of faced with the harsh reality that you might not get a job right out of college. You will probably have to work for a couple years in a job you don't want in order to gain work experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another, and that's probably a whole nother topic too, of just the like, actually, yeah, well, I won't even touch that. I was just going to say that like, that would be a really interesting one, like that time, like right after college. Like, what does that look like? Because that was a really like super fun, but also super challenging time for us. And I feel like a lot of our peers and our friends, like, yeah, they don't really prepare you for that. But again, we won't dive into that. It's a whole nother situation.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that later.
But yeah, I mean, there's so many different, I was going to bring up like another point, I guess going back to the economics a little bit, impact of side hustles too, right? Like it definitely makes sense, right? Find the job that doesn't feel like a job and have fun with it. And obviously that's everyone's like dream, but it also just makes me think about these essential jobs that people aren't going to want to have anymore. And I think we're already seeing that, right? Like grocery stores, gas stations, gardening, like plumbing, like all of those things are highly essential, but there's just not a huge market because again, like there is this social push and maybe not social, but there's a social push and there is just opportunity out there for so many more people to follow their dream job or what seems more like a dream job. And so I just like know that those fields are being impacted. Like there just aren't enough people to work those things, which is another part of why things are getting more expensive. So it's just kind of funny, right? Like groceries are more expensive, probably partly because of the logistics behind getting groceries places and not enough people working in grocery stores. And again, I don't know that for a fact, but this is just me kind of extrapolating from just trying to understand everything from a very high level view. Because people don't want to work there. And then so the prices go up and then like, oh, I can't afford to work that. So then that's why I need a side hustle. And it just, all those, they're all connected, I feel like. And it's hard to connect those dots. But definitely I think has an impact.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, it definitely does. And it's all, I mean, just comparing it from several generations ago, 50s, 60s, 70s, to now, 2025, it is a completely different world. It feels like a totally different country and totally different situation and circumstance than those people were.
Yeah.
And that's something that I feel I get stuck on a little bit, and maybe other people do too, is that, oh man, like those were kind of the good old days. Like, why can't we do things the way that they were doing?
Yeah.
And
everything's different.
But everything is totally different. Technology is different. Housing is different. Families are different.
Yeah.
Culture
The
is
way
different.
We work, everything.
Everything has just changed so dramatically. And I think we're all kind of trying to just navigate this new landscape. Especially because we still have a lot of people here who can contribute to the conversation about what it was like back in, the before the 2000s, basically 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc., even early 2000s.
Yeah.
And so we have all these different perspectives and ideas flying around, and it just makes it kind of hard to figure out the best way to move forward. And I think that's why a lot of people are kind of gravitating towards the side hustle thing too.
Yeah.
Because they want to do something that makes them happy, that gives them financial freedom, that maybe is a hobby as well. It doesn't necessarily need to be grocery delivery, pet sitting, etc. It could be something like making videos or like podcasting or making music or creating art or whatever. Then that is super cool.
Right.
And
it's what fires you up.
yeah, it's what makes people excited. And I think that's a really cool part of it too. And what we see come out of it is this also creative space that people are able to dive into as well, that maybe they weren't able to do before.
Right. It could fulfill that portion of you, right? That if you're not getting that from your 9-to-5 job, it can act as like an opportunity for you to either build on those different skills or use a different part of your brain, which I think is all highly valuable.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, there's so many more other areas I feel like we could go here, but I don't want to take up too much time. I guess last thing for you here. Why did you start this podcast with me? I'm curious. I don't think I've ever asked you straight up.
That's a funny question.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, I think it's because I just turned 30, and my 20s I used to do some self-discovery. I think I was just trying to figure out, who am I? What do I want? What are my personal values? And how do I want to approach life? What do I want my life to look like? And I also worked really hard in my 20s too, especially my early 20s. I worked my butt off going to school, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, getting my master's degree, and then getting my job and getting my career set up. That was the goal for the 20s, is like going to school, hustle, get this done, get a job, settle in the career. That was the 20s goal. My 30s goal is to connect with myself even further and to try new things, because for such a long time, I just focused on what my career was.
Yep.
And it didn't involve creative outlets or baking or making art or, trying new exercise classes, things like that. And so now that I'm kind of moving into this different era of life and just a different phase and a different development of who I am, I just wanted to try something new.
Continue to develop
myself and try something new. Also create a side hustle.
Right, some extra cash
for that, student loan debt I have left over from getting my master's degree. We're
doing okay on it.
We're doing fine. But I think there's always room to do more. And so that's why.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Why are you doing
Why am I doing?
why are you doing a podcast?
You know me. I can't stop. I guess same thing in the 20s, right? I guess I had a big pivot in my 20s where it was your whole life. I feel like up until you're about 20, maybe early 20s, is like you're on such this routine. It's literally like wake up, go to school, whatever. And like, that's about it. That's like your main responsibility. And everyone's situation is a little bit different, but at least, I don't know, I guess our community, like that was kind of the thing. But I was so focused on sports and school and also just not really liking school, which is funny because I love to learn and I love gaining new skills and doing new things and all those things. But I just hated traditional school. I just hate the format, and that could be a whole nother conversation. Again, man, I feel like I've talked about like 3 different areas. We should, when we run this one back, I got to like make a note like, oh, talk about that. Anyways, my brain's all over the place now. But yeah, I just discovered in like my early 20s, getting out of college, I felt like I was just I was just such on this track, it was like a very dedicated track. It's get through school, do this, do X, do Y, boom, and then figure out stuff from there. And so the 20s for me was just super, just a lot of exploration with new hobbies and new skills and just trying to do things differently and just not doing school anymore. I know it sounds like I'm just like bashing school, which I'm not like bashing
You
it.
are.
I am bashing it. Okay.
No, you're not.
I kind of am. But that's fine because that's like honestly how I feel. And I know there's value in sticking things out and the whole thing. My parents told me like, oh, it's about discipline and work ethic. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. But yeah, so I guess for me, it's just, this one's just yet another thing that fires me up, that gets me excited, I love creative outlets. I love working on new things. Anytime you start something like this, any side hustle, a podcast is a great example, right? Like you're just introducing a bunch of new opportunities to learn different skills too. Like I've had one other podcast in the past, which is very different than this one. It was like a sports podcast, but the first couple episodes, I remember listening back and I was like, oh, wow, it didn't sound super natural. And I hope I sound a little bit more natural now, but it's a skill, right? It takes time and you just have to try it. And then there's all the little intricacies in there too. Like, oh, we had to figure out the best microphones, what works for a podcast, and how are we going to get a podcast onto the internet? And do we need a website? And oh, you know what? We also need to market through social media and you have to do that whole thing. And to me, like, that's my favorite way to learn. And at the end of the day, once I can do something creative, learn skills, whatever, that's where I find the most just fulfilledness. Is that a word? Fulfilledness?
Fulfillment.
The place where I feel I feel most fulfilled. How about that? Is when I can kind of do that iterative process and I can see development and put things out there and kind of like you said too, just put yourself out there a little bit, take a little bit more of a risk, just do something new. And so that's kind of my long-winded version of that.
I love it.
But I think, I think that's just all ties in, and that kind of goes back to the spirit of what side hustles can allow, right? We talked a lot about the finance, but there's also so much more that can go into it. And I mean, there's more, but that's the deal.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. In conclusion, what's the deal with side hustles? They are a way for people to make money.
Yep.
They are a way for people to express creativity, maybe make a hobby into something that can make a little money for them. They're a way to try something new. They're a way to put yourself out there. We have the technology and the resources now to do that, and life looks very different now than it did in the past. But if we can use it to our advantage and get ahead and make the life that we want to make and do the things that we want to do, meet the goals that we want to meet, I think sometimes having a side hustle can get you there a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I agree. So in other words, go out there and get yourself a side hustle.
Or don't.
Or don't. Just as cool.
Just as cool. It's totally fine.
It really
Either
is,
way.
honestly. But
Either way.
If you're thinking how about this? If you're thinking about it or you've thought about it, freaking do it.
Yeah, just do it.
Just do it. Why not?
Just do it.
Yeah, like Chillaboof. Is that how you say that?
I don't know.
Anyways, do it. Just do it. Why not?
Yeah.
Just give it a try. But yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I think that is going to wrap it up for the first episode of What's the Deal podcast. Just to reiterate, we're not like experts in the finance area, economics, nothing like that. We're just, like we said, just a regular married couple who is freaking has a side hustle.
Yeah, we're just here to share the research and the information that we find and just have conversations about this stuff and hopefully learn a little bit more and share what we learn with you all.
Exactly. All right. Thank you again, everybody. And we'll catch you in the next one.